some brief bios about our panelists. We are waiting for Dr. Eckstein to join us, but he is an emergency medicine physician involved with with LA Fire. So you never know for physicians, as is Dr. Flatley, emergency medicine physician. You never know what pops up for these physicians in their daily routines, which are rarely routine. So we do hope that he will join us, because what he is doing is also groundbreaking in virtual care. But we do have a wide variety of types of care that are going to be talked about today with our panelists. Let me introduce them to you. Dr. Vince Caimano is the co-founder and CEO of Peer Support Solutions. He has 11 years of video-based peer support leadership experience. He serves on the board of the National Association of Peer Supporters and has been recognized by SAMHSA for his pioneering work in behavioral health technology. He has also worked in consulting, putting his PhD to work with organizations such as Accenture, Watson Wyatt, Towers Perrin, and Opinion Research. He holds a PhD in organizational psychology from Washington University in St. Louis and a BA in psychology with the business minor from the University of South Florida. So Vince, congratulations and thank you for joining us today. Jamey Edwards, a great friend and colleague in the telemedicine space. To me, he is a co-founder and the CEO of CloudBreak Health. Jamey was also previously the CEO of Emergent Medical Associates, and under his leadership, built that into the leading multi-specialty medical group in the Southwest United States. He remains a member, as a board member of the EMA, the Emergent Medical Associates. He's also active in the community as a board member of the Santa Monica chapter of the American Red Cross, the Young Presidents Organization, and is a mentor with the LA Incubator Startup Engine. Jamey's also been recognized. He is a great entrepreneur. He's been recognized 3 times as an honoree with the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award and twice from the Los Angeles Business Journal's Healthcare Leadership Awards. He's also a proud member of Pink Sox Tribe with a group of healthcare innovators looking to disrupt healthcare and drive positive change for both patients and providers. Jamey has a BA in Organization Development from Cornell and also earned his MBA from Cornell's Johnson Graduate School of Management. Dr. Paul Flatley, DO, is a founder and CEO of Direct2MD and Direct2Recovery, which I think everyone listening today will find very compelling. What Paul's been doing for 10 years now in the telehealth space. So these are very seasoned people in virtual care delivery. Dr. Flatley is an accomplished leader in the medical community with 20 years practicing emergency medicine, including running the ED at a major level 1 trauma center in Scottsdale, Arizona. He is certified in emergency medicine and I know was board eligible in addiction medication, although I did not confirm if that board has been granted to him. But
ask the boards. Just slid the curve down to me. Because I'm telling you, studying for the boards at 31 is different from studying for the boards at 52, I found out.
No doubt, but congratulations on that, holding both of those board certifications. He is a member of the American College of Emergency Physicians, and interestingly, is also the team emergency physician for the Arizona Coyotes. So we have a really diverse group. Dr. Paul Eckstein, who we hope will be able to join us, is also highly distinguished in his field. He is the co-founder and CEO of Tele911, which we'll talk about a little bit later. He is nationally recognized with 30 years in emergency medicine and medical services. He is the medical director and the EMS Bureau Commander for LA Fire Department, which is so critical considering the scope of services and geography that they cover to protect all of us in Southern California. He has innovated a number of times with major systems, including a revamping of their 911 EMS dispatch system and other programs, including telemedicine programs. He is a professor of emergency medicine at the Keck School of Medicine at USC. He holds his Doctor of Medicine degree as well as a Master's in Public Health in Homeland Security. So he's merged not only to build his expertise in emergency medicine, but in disaster and recovery services as well. So our next point of business then is to ask each of our panelists to give a brief introduction to their company and the services that they provide. So Vince, would you kick us off, please?
Thank you, Dave, and thank you for that kind introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here today with you all. My company, Peer Support Solutions, provides high-quality, video-based peer support for behavioral health, chronic illness, and rare disease sufferers. Our two platforms host over 1,000 groups per month, and we help people from over 140 countries. We pioneered this service over 11 years ago, back when Zoom popularly meant something that you did when you drove a Mazda car. We have a relatively new platform called Hey Peers that provides a great variety of peer support services to end users, service providers, and also to organizations. We provide both SaaS as well as turnkey solutions. Our turnkey offerings feature providing small group peer support meetings led by certified peer specialists that also includes evidence-based material. So that combination of elements leads to measurable outcomes. And we've conducted a study of our services that demonstrates some really strong impact of having people involved in this kind of activity. Our main focus is on B2B sales to providers, EAPs, employers, and nonprofits. Our business model is based on fee for services, although end users or the general public can also access our services on a pay-as-you-go basis. We're privately held and financed.
Great, thank you, Vince. Jamey, would you like to go next, please?
Sure. So Jamey Edwards, CEO and co-founder of CloudBreak Health. Really a pleasure to be here today. Dave, I was super stoked when you reached out because we probably have connected more at conferences than we have here in LA, despite living not too far from each other. So excited to be reconnected, man. Great to be here with everyone. CloudBreak is a unified telemedicine solution focused on targeting and resolving health disparities and social determinants of health. We started off bringing language interpreters to the point of care. We're the first company to pioneer it back in 2003. So the company has been around for a while. A lot of our growth started though when we rebranded as CloudBreak Health, as our clients were asking us to do more. And when they realized they had invested in was really a robust telemedicine platform that could route them to the right resource that they needed. And so over the course of the last few years, we've added new use cases as we've broadened away from just the language services to telestroke, telepsychiatry, teleurology. During COVID, we launched telequarantine, which allowed us to turn any hospital room into a connected care room, really helped reduce the use of PPE, reduce the risk of contagion. We had 27 health systems adopted kind of overnight. We offered it to the market for free because that was the right thing to do during that wave. And it was very successful for a few reasons, but the least of which is we didn't forget about the patient and how isolating COVID was as a diagnosis. And so on the platform, we gave the ability for the patient to call home in a HIPAA compliant fashion and do those types of things as well. Excited to be here with you today. We've made an announcement over the last few months that we're going to be merging into a SPAC and creating a digital health super company that is going to be north of 100 million of revenues, publicly traded and global and profitable. So excited about all of those different dynamics. But CloudBreak right now is in 1,800 plus hospitals across the country. We do over 100,000 encounters a month over the platform, over what are 14,000 plus video endpoints in the field today. So excited to delve into it more with you guys.
Sounds great. Thank you, Jamey. And Paul, would you introduce your group, please?
You bet. And thanks, Dave, again, echoing these guys. Thanks for inviting me. You know how passionate I am about telemedicine and the things. It's maybe unlike some people on here. I am an emergency room doc, but I had very similar to many of you, an entrepreneurial seizure a couple of years ago, and man, it took off from that. I have no control over it. I'm just trying to, read the tea leaves, right? I'm powerless. It's really interesting, but
Paul, I'm going to steal that line, entrepreneurial seizure. I've not heard that one before, so I'm going to steal
By the way,
that.
Paul, didn't you mention being an addiction specialist? You're like addicted to entrepreneurship.
It's right in my wheelhouse. I'm telling you, it's hilarious. Well, and just echoes so many the way people get into these businesses. But yeah, you do your time in the ER and takes a little piece out. So admittedly, part of this was, gosh, there's got to be a better way to deliver healthcare because you're seeing these cases in the ER, and it shouldn't be $2,700 for a $4 amoxicillin prescription, right? So part of that is that calling to kind of fix a broken system. But man, the opportunity is there, and technology made it real. And not being the first in the game, we had a little of that advantage of looking at. We wanted to be high utilization. That's maybe arguably the biggest problem with telehealth, at least on the direct to patient model. There's these big companies that are very successful financially, but not delivering on the back end. So our goal going into it was, hey, high utilization model. How do you do that? Well, you've got to change the pay structure. We are 99% a B2B business. We go right to the owners of small businesses, really not in the big Honeywell categories, right? We're down at the plumbers and ABC Electric, and these are business owners that have a hard time providing care to their employees. And so they need a solution. And for a subscription model that's, something roughly $10 an individual or $20 a month, they can have ongoing or 24-hour access. So goal number one was high utilization. We accomplished that by onboarding everybody, telling them, hey, pull out your phone, this is how you use it. And two, changing the payment model that gives their employees access 24/7 in their family. And then we just looked at the back end and said, hey, are we doing everything we can in telemedicine? Because unlike some of the innovative things you're doing here in our field, where it's kind of a virtual urgent care, if you will, or direct primary care, 80% of the calls are the low-hanging fruit that always should have been a phone call, really. It's acute illness and med refills. I think I have strep throat, I think I have bronchitis, or can I get a refill on my blood pressure medication? And COVID made it clear that we didn't need to be in front of people to do that. So that's what we do. We have a different service model for high utilization. We see about 9% of our covered lives every month, so it's kind of high touch. And we provide back-end services of, hey, we have local doctors. We'll help you navigate the system. If you have a kid that has to go to the hospital, go to this ER because there's peds there and peds inpatient beds. And there's efficiencies of going to the right place. And you only know that if you have a local provider. So not call center based. We send people for x-rays and labs, right? We'll send a prescription. If you have a low risk ankle twist for your kid who twisted it playing soccer, rather than sending to the ER, heck, go to outpatient radiology. It's going to be a negative film. Cash price is under $30. Don't even use your deductible, reducing claims. So that's really what we do. Again, it's a little different version on a high utilization virtual urgent care or virtual primary care. And we started that in Arizona, and now we've expanded it. We're technically open in 18 states, but California, Utah, Nevada, and Arizona probably have 99% of our business. So we're kind of getting ahead of it. And as we did this, you had to have a place to work. I have a personal interest in the opioid epidemic because if you work in the ER, that's what you do. Half of your cases are opioid related. Overdose, maybe a relapse, maybe shopping for meds, maybe an acute withdrawal. It's all pain related, and the overdose has spiked. Started doing that, just literally got my waiver to be able to do that work, and now I've become board certified because I'm so passionate about it. But when we started a few years ago, you had to have brick and mortar. You were limited geographically because you had to have the patient in your office to see them. That was the one requirement to prescribe any type of controlled med. Well, with COVID and with forward-thinking Congress, which is almost hard to even imagine, they allowed this to happen for addiction medicine as a trial. And it's so evidence-based and working with things like Suboxone, buprenorphine, that now it's become the one exception to prescribing a controlled med over the internet with a live call without meeting them in your office first. And that's huge ramifications, right? It opened up our ability to do this geographically from Phoenix to Arizona and beyond. And the reality is these patients get a lot of stigma and they're not inclined to try to get care, right? The numbers are higher. COVID, 80,241 overdose deaths in this country up through May of 2020. It's the highest numbers we've ever seen. And the big burst happened between February and May. Right. And so right with COVID. So what do we do now? We do an online call like this with a patient. The next day they get on an online call with somebody like Vince's group that does the peer support. It's online substance use counseling, which is the secret sauce. I used to think it was a medicine. Medicine just makes you vulnerable to listen and learn. And so you do the online doctoring, you do the online counseling, but now I got to have you go to SonoraQuest and pee in a cup. Nope. Now we do saliva tests. We mail them to your house. So you do in-home right in front of me. It's certifiable, validated, and stigma-free. And last but not least, we have your buprenorphine or Suboxone delivered to your house. If you're a first responder, you're not required to do drug screening because you're unionized. you're least inclined to try to get help because it's your livelihood. Guess what? We can do it stigma-free. We're doing it with the community. It's evidence-based. And now the big kicker in that is we're doing it in corrections. The NIH endorsed this. It's malpractice not to provide MAT treatment, and that affects all the corrections. So we're doing telemedicine with the federal prison here in Phoenix and other corrections. We think it's a great way to capture them after their initial involvement with law enforcement, get them on the road to recovery. We can do it remotely from their home in an anklet. And so, sorry, I always talk too long, but those are the two branches. We're really excited, and we're getting outcomes. Heck, I'm an egotist. I'm an ER doc because I wanted to go save a bunch of people. And where did Dr. Eckstein go? He'll tell you, my gosh, I have 3 notches in my belt over the last 20 years. This addiction medicine is a different animal. I swear we save somebody in this office every day, and all of our docs and PAs are doing this from home because they can do it safely and wonderful. So there, again, a lot of opportunity, and it changes. We never needed it more. Thanks for having me.
No, it's great, Paul, because you actually answered the first question in your introduction, which is you've developed these disruptive models, as you described it, the payer model, how you're engaging the patient, how you're providing services. So let me ask Jamey next, and then Vince, I'll come to you. Jamey, what type of disruption have you and your team introduced into the market to make these types of services available?
So I think there's a few things, and just to couch it right, and I know Paul and the rest of the crew will agree with this, like the issue facing healthcare right now as it goes through its digital transformation has nothing to do with technology. It is a culture issue. We have a whole system that is built around the in-person visit, and trying to migrate these people. Like if you were going to build a new health system today, it would be digital first, right? Like building it from scratch, wayfinding, everything else that digital can bring you, you would build a digital first. And instead we're fighting with a lot of the things that Paul's kind of figured out from a payer standpoint, and how you get compensated for these services, and structurally how you let a doctor know that they're going to be okay if they actually see a patient via telemed first, via having them drive to the office, park, pay for parking, sit in your waiting room for 30 or 45 minutes for what it turns out to be a 10-minute visit, right? So when we talk about the innovations that we do, we spend a lot of time doing cultural change management when we drop technology off on site. It's not enough to be like, here's the tech, it's easy to use, guys, have at it. Because what we found out is clinical teams revert back to their mean behavior. They revert back to exactly what they've done before, unless you have someone in their ear reminding them why they should be using the tech, until the tech becomes second nature. And for us, I would say innovation wise, it's all been around UI and UX and how you actually make things easy enough. And I'll even say fun, like the platforms should be fun to use. We don't spend enough time on that in healthcare because we're all very serious, because lives are on the line and we're all very risk averse. But if you can build an engaging healthcare platform that's fun, that's easy to use, it will get adopted. One of the challenges, and you guys had brought this up before, is that when people were originally pricing consumer-based telemedicine on a PMPM model, a lot of times those technology-enabled medical groups got paid more when the system wasn't in use. So what a perverse incentive there. So what we've really tried to do as a business is change those incentives, make it much easier for people to use the technology. And during COVID, for us, because we do so much hospital-based telemedicine, our volumes actually dropped, because people were deferring medicine, all elective surgeries were canceled. So all of our in-hospital telemedicine that was happening declined in line with people wanting to stay away from their healthcare facility and avoid infection. So what we did was accelerate our product roadmap, and we ended up launching the telequarantine solution, which was a game changer in market for a lot of our hospitals. And those are the types of innovations I think that really matter. It's like listening to what your clients want and addressing their needs. It's amazing what happens when we as technologists and healthcare people stop talking and start listening and figuring out how we can impound what we're learning into the product we're actually going to roll out into the field. And Dave, I mean, obviously, I've seen SnapMD and all of your success, and this better than anyone because you guys designed what was a very user-friendly product that had very robust capabilities. You have to make this stuff fun and easy to use, and you have to support technology with culture change.
No, I completely agree, Jamey. And I think oftentimes we also forget about what the provider's experience is going to be when you talk about the usability of these platforms. We had a fun experience about 2 years ago. We launched, we have a lot of clients where the patient is not able to facilitate a visit on their own. For instance, 5 years ago, we did the first remote evaluations of patients in nursing homes in the state of Mississippi ever to occur. We had the 2 U.S. senators, we had the governor. I got to have dinner at the governor's mansion and go to his man cave at the mansion. It was a big event in the state of Mississippi, which is amazingly, with all the problems that you might perceive they have down there, they are one of the leading states in the adoption of telemedicine, interestingly.
Yeah.
But what was interesting is that the providers felt very comfortable with the application and the ability to use remote medical devices to assess a patient who was remote and have the appropriate information to make a disciplined evaluation of that patient and a treatment plan. So couldn't agree with you more, Jamey. Vince, coming over to you, what is it that you guys have disrupted? How is it that you've changed the marketplace and opened up these services to serve more patients better?
Yeah, well, we've taken something that was pretty ubiquitous. Support groups have been around for a while, most of them in church basements or community centers, and we brought them to people in an online format that was not just an easier way to deliver those services, but also superior service. I got involved in this because at one point in my life, I was looking for a support group. And the group that I wanted to go to was about 30 miles away. And of course, here in LA on a weeknight, I would have had to allow 2 hours to get to the darn meeting. So I started a support group. And what I learned over time was there were support groups and there were support groups. There were some that were very carefully constructed, done consistently, and provided uplift and as Paul was mentioning earlier, the opportunity to literally save lives when people just needed someone to come alongside them on their journey and help them to their next way station. And so when we brought that kind of support group online, we found that not only were we providing a superior peer support service, but we're also able to achieve measurable outcomes, which was another new wrinkle, because no one was really measuring what peer support did for a person. There were a few research studies here and there, and we learned that the people in our online support groups, in the case where we looked at depression sufferers who were in one particular kind of support group, which included, by the way, leadership by a certified peer specialist, which is a growing cadre of people who have lived experience, who've been able to achieve a certain level of wellness or recovery, and then have received training to help others. We use peer specialists and evidence-based material in our meetings to show that you could actually do things like get a 50% decrement in the use of emergency rooms and urgent care. You can get a 70% reduction in hospital readmissions. So we're not just helping more people, but we're helping more people in more significant ways. And a lot of organizations have taken note of that. We've had the opportunity to work with the largest healthcare providers in the country, and we are now expanding our services so that on a new platform, we're really creating something that's very different. It's a real community of peer supporters. It's a marketplace for peer support where individual peer supporters have an opportunity to provide services to organizations as well as to individuals, and do that in more ways. Kind of the heart of what we do, though, is video-based group meetings. We find that kind of robust interchange of people that's carefully guided and structured gives the most impact. And people are both highly satisfied and also helped in a really special way.
Well, Vince, I know I've shared with you, I happen to be to the group. I happen to be a widower, and my wife died as a result of bipolar disorder. And dealing with those kind of death situations, I had gone through 3 different counselors, and my last and my most helpful counselor, not that the others weren't, but this one, maybe the timing was perfect. She was able to help me a lot. She referred me to a group setting in Pasadena near where I live. And those group settings were phenomenally beneficial. It's interesting to see how people open up with strangers, sometimes even more easily than with people in your own family who, just are uncomfortable talking to you about these issues. And I find Vince's model very compelling, opening up these types of services to people. That's why I really wanted Vince to be here with us today, understanding the need for mental health services for with the shootings going on, the 2 shootings in the last week in America, these mass shootings. We know that we have mental health issues in America, and there's a variety of ways to get those services. And I think by the work that Peer Solutions is doing, it's really going to help open those services up across the country. So congratulations to you and your team with that. The next question I kind of like to ask you all as entrepreneurs, and having had the entrepreneurial seizure, as Paul talked about earlier, what does the landscape for your companies look like today? And whether it's competitive or market or payer or otherwise, what are the challenges that you're experiencing in getting greater adoption or growth in your business? And how are you innovating to get over or across those challenges? So Paul, how about if you would start off with anything you've got to say about that?
Sure. I think, you start with that concept that you think what you're doing, well, it's the sexiest thing in healthcare, right? There's telemedicine and everybody's going into it. But boy, the challenge is, COVID might be opportunistic for us, right? A lot of people, fewer people, heck, it was already a time suck, loss of productivity and costly to go get healthcare in the ER, urgent care, but make it dangerous. And now you've really tipped the scale, right? People don't want to go in any waiting room. So good opportunity for us being a B2B business. We thought it's great. We got lots of calls, but half of our small businesses were going out of business and couldn't afford even to maintain their subscriptions, right? So unanticipated consequences that way. I think that the opportunity to put in place a high utilization plan is really how you start fixing this system. Again, it's the right models. It's telemedicine. We're just scratched the surface. Everybody on here has a little different way to do it. So we're just scratching the surface of what you can do safely and efficiently and cost effectively in the delivery of healthcare, even if whether it's through the hospital systems and using devices, or whether it's doing the peer support part or the actual down to medicine and prescribing antibiotics. All these things become integrated. The world is the oyster of telemedicine. I really believe it. The challenges is what Jamey mentioned. It's culturally, right? We even see that in our own little businesses. Our utilization starts low. We figured out now we have to go in and get one employee champion to talk it up, and then it becomes the culture in the business, right? And so now everybody at our bigger businesses, hey, you got a little problem, I'll call DirectMD, and then if we can't figure it out, we'll help you navigate it. So there's efficiencies, but man, that's a slow learning curve. Addiction recovery is no different. This has been hard to access in the best of times, costly, whether there's adequate coverage for it. A lot of patients that don't have coverage at all trying to get into addiction care. So there's limitations there. Telemedicine makes it much more affordable and accessible, and everybody's got a phone. And now you don't, heck, if you live in Globe, you've got a Walmart across the, you got a Walgreens pharmacy and a guy that sells fentanyl across the street, but there's no addiction medicine doc. So to be able to do that remotely, now I think the opportunity is there. And it's, I don't know, it's people like me figuring it out with people like Jamey, like, hey, I've got this idea, but I need a brain. Can you help me on the other end of that? So anyway, no, great opportunities, but the obstructions are, and on my end, it's having the right vision, and how do you get the right people to buy in and help you culturally change, not a business at a time, but a community at a time.
Great. Hey, I see Dr. Eckstein, it looks like you have been able to join us. When you're ready, we'll introduce you. We are glad that you were able to join us and your innovative company. At USC, we did provide an introduction to your background, but could you take a few minutes and introduce us to Tele911 and the services that you're providing?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for the delay. Thank you for having me. So we're Tele911. What we do is we are integrating telemedicine and patient navigation into the 911 and EMS system. So despite concerted efforts by many of the payers to try to keep patients out of the 911 system for non-life-threatening problems, these efforts have been largely unsuccessful. So contrary to popular belief, the overwhelming majority of 911 calls for medical emergencies tend to not be time critical. And the estimated cost of the healthcare system as a whole in this country is approximately $32 billion per year in potentially avoidable emergency department and EMS expenses. So what we do is we work with the EMS provider agencies. We integrate with their 911 system through their CAD, computer-aided dispatch system, their electronic patient care records. We have the paramedics download our free app on their smart devices. And then they encounter patients who do not have any high-risk features or unstable vital signs, which is a majority of patients. They simply hit the app. They are connected with a board-certified, one of our board-certified emergency physicians. And then our physician conducts a virtual visit through telemedicine with the patient while the paramedics are still on scene. Paramedics have already acquired vital signs and a provider impression. And then our physician has the opportunity to disposition the patient to avoid ambulance transport to an ED, which has been the traditional model of EMS. Basically, the only option since the inception of EMS in the 70s or even the 60s was everyone goes to the ED by ambulance, or they're left at home with no follow-up at some degree of risk. So our physician is able to keep the patient at home. We call treatment in place after a very brief evaluation that follows a paramedic evaluation, in which case the physician texts the hyperlink to the patient for aftercare instructions, the same instructions they receive in an emergency department. They also would send any electronic prescriptions that be necessary to a preferred pharmacy. And then the paramedics are released to go available for the next call, which might be time critical. And then if the patient is not transported, we'll do a next day telemedicine follow-up. If the physician feels the patient needs some hands-on evaluation or lab tests or some emergency imaging, they'll try to direct the paramedics to transport the patient to in-network facility. That could be an in-network emergency department or what we call an alternative destination, which may be an urgent care facility or mental health facility. So we try to effect a paradigm shift from the traditional EMS model, which is the binary option. All roads lead to the ER by ambulance, or a patient remains at home. Their needs are not met, and there's an element of risk. And we've gotten tremendous traction from both the EMS provider agencies because we're solving a huge problem for them at no cost, and obviously for the payers because there's a potential huge cost savings for the payers. And in terms of patient care, it's a much higher level of patient care, and it's patient-centered. There's a level of convenience, and also the patient saves money because they're not exposed to sometimes significant co-pays when they go to an out-of-network emergency department.
So let me follow up, and it's in line with a prior question I asked for the group, but I'm going to frame it a little differently. How much of what you're offering to the market is digital versus where you actually have to have a provider or a person involved in this? How much of this is an automated transaction versus an actual personally delivered service virtually?
So that's a great question. All of our interactions in our first iteration involve an interaction with a physician, initially a paramedic on scene, and then transitions to the patient on scene 100% of the time, and then the downstream navigation. There's nothing automated right now. It's all involves that personal virtual care. Right.
Great. So back to, so thank you again for joining us today. It's fascinating what you're doing. And we wanted to say thank you also with your work with LA Fire and the leadership you provided to all of us here in Southern California, making people safer in their homes and their workplaces. So thank you for your work and for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for your kind words. I very much appreciate it.
Absolutely. Jamey, back over to you now. What are the challenges that you guys are facing, and how are you kind of getting around those challenges in the market today?
Yeah, healthcare is full of challenges, right? We deal with supply chain, which I think is a big challenge because supply chain in health systems today is currently, there's some backwards incentives that are there. If you talk to any supply chain person, they're like, great, how much can you reduce our costs? Is that the right question to be asking, or is it, how are you going to help us create value for our healthcare system and build a sustainable relationship with our patient, right? Because that's the challenge facing local healthcare today. And everything that we do with a company is in support of local healthcare, not in lieu of local healthcare, right? And that's an important thing. We think that patients today would rather, if you live in Los Angeles, you'd rather be seen by a doctor's at Cedars or UCLA or your own physician who has your longitudinal patient record, who understands you, than by seeing, and then be seen by a national group based out of New York who doesn't have the ability to fast track you to the back of the ER if they're concerned about your chest pain, right? Or any of those different types of things. So for us, the challenge is about breaking down silos, not only within hospital, because by the way, IT in hospital doesn't speak to clinical, who doesn't speak to administration a lot of the time, but it's changing the mindset of our healthcare system. As we've all talked about moving to value-based care, how effective has value-based care been to date when people are still getting reimbursed on a fee-for-service basis and they're getting paid for what they do to someone as opposed to what they do for someone? And it's a much different mindset. So for me, the biggest challenge is centered around culture change. And the way that we do that is by educating the market on what a return on investment actually looks like. It's going into CFOs and saying, hey, instead of us saving you $50,000 by you using someone else, let me show you how I'm going to increase your EBITDA by 3 million and how I'm going to increase your number of patients flowing through your hospital by improving patient flow, by making it easier for you to discharge this patient to an appropriate level of care. All of those different things. The reason I think that Silicon Valley hasn't been as successful in cracking healthcare is because you can't just throw technology at a problem in healthcare. It's technology, it's services, it's support. And I think where people have been really successful are taking ideas of people who have worked in healthcare, who've seen the problem firsthand, and changing it from the inside out, understanding all of the various issues that they're going to face and trying to affect culture at the hospital and trying to pull together not only all those siloed hospital departments that are currently making their own technology decisions instead of thinking more enterprise, which they should be doing. But now I'm thinking, how does this hospital collaborate with the federally qualified healthcare clinic down the street? How do they collaborate with that patient's in-network physician afterwards to make sure you're discharging them to a point and a place of care that's not going to cost them an arm and a leg and all those different things? It's, at UpHealth, we're kind of referring to this as building digitally enabled care communities, right? And that is where we think the future of healthcare is really going. It's surrounding a patient with their care continuum, delivering it to them on their terms, meeting them where they are in a place where they're most happy, which most often is not the hospital and is not the doctor's office. So those are the types of challenges that are out there. But again, I think most of them revolve around cultural issues much more than they revolved around technology.
I'm going to bring it over to you, Vince, in a second. I was at Yale about 2 years ago, and they had an older building, was their health center, in the center of campus, perfectly situated, but they wanted a new facility, and of course they built it at the edge of campus. And by the way, the mental health facility had a big sign that said mental health facility.
Right.
The students would not go near it. Number one, they didn't want to cross campus in their pajamas, whatever the hell they were wearing. And and it was just like, I don't want to walk over there, and I don't want to walk into that door. And again, that's why I asked Vince to join us today, because I think whether it's a situation like mine, in a traumatic loss of my wife, and in a grief counseling, where you're starving to find a resource that will help you, and a group of people where you feel safe talking about these issues. So I'm just curious, Vince, if you could talk to the group a little bit about how you're overcoming the challenges of acceptance, even from in the B2B side of your business. How do you get employers and others to say, these are the kind of services our employees need? I thought it might be helpful for the group to hear some of the things that you're doing to build the adoption of the services you deliver.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to jump on the culture change bandwagon here and say that getting a provider to change their orientation towards something like peer support when their thinking has been, this is something that's simple, it's possibly threatening or competes with providing therapy from a licensed therapist, not understanding the adjunctive power of adding this to the equation and building out a stronger wellness kind of model. So we've had to work very closely with our client organizations to train and to provide systems and other kinds of support to get the referrals that it's usually the leadership has bought into our service. Obviously, that's why we're working with the organization. But then after that, bringing along their troops and getting them to really kick it into gear is the challenge, and usually takes a while to make that come about. I think that for the end user, for the patient, there's a different kind of cultural challenge in that more often than not, they're used to going to maybe not a building that says mental health on it, but they're used to going somewhere to be with other people. It might take them a while to get there. It might be uncomfortable at first. But to do this virtually can also be very scary. And so some people will not turn on their camera. Some people won't say very much in the meeting. And the challenge for the people that facilitate our groups is to really very gently, very carefully engage those folks and bring them together. And the other thing I want to reinforce also is that a lot of people are out there in Silicon Valley and now elsewhere trying to develop what I would consider, a digitized version of social support. And to me, that's such a ridiculous idea, that we believe the human element is just absolutely essential, that having that personal contact, being able to really talk with others who are on a similar journey can make all of the difference. And to somehow say you're going to, through gamification, you're going to nudge through putting evidence material in some app somewhere, you're going to help a person along. There's a lot of skill building that can be done that way, and it's certainly something that where we've partnered with organizations that are providing skill building services, which can serve a person well over the longer haul. We think that to get to that point where someone who, for example, is deeply depressed, to get to the point where they could actually do that skill building, they need to have other people encouraging them, listening to them, and working with them so that they can get to a better place.
So my next question is a bit of a question that wasn't on the list I provided guys earlier. So this is Dave's improvisation moment. One of my favorite books as a fellow entrepreneur is Crossing the Chasm. And I remember when I was at USC, my great professor of entrepreneurship, Tom O'Malley, God bless his soul that he passed away a couple of years ago, but Tom would talk about the valley of death as an entrepreneur. How do you get to getting a proof of concept, and how do you get to scale? And how do you build distribution so that you can build a sustainable enterprise? So, I'd like to ask each of you kind of that type of question is, what are you doing to get through those periods of the valley of death or the crossing of the chasm to build a sustainable enterprise? So, Jamey, maybe we'll come to you first with the fun things you're doing, and maybe you can even add a little bit about your SPAC and what you're doing, because my guess is you're going to go through another crossing of a chasm as part of that new enterprise.
Yeah, to being a public company, which, by the way, was never part of my game plan as part of my career. Look, I would like to tell you that the entrepreneurial journey, like you dig in, you work hard, and it's a hockey stick. But the fact of the matter is your hockey stick always has chinks in it. And what you never read about in the papers, right, is that the $300 million exit that happened for a given entrepreneur really went to the investors. The entrepreneur who worked for 15 years on the business never really got anything because of liquidation preferences and everything else that we all do with our companies and our businesses while we're trying to make it work. It was kind of funny, like the UpHealth deal got announced and there was like, oh my God, it's like, when are you going to buy the plane? I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm not getting anything out of this. Like, I'm investing in the new business and I want to grow it. So in terms of crossing the chasm, look, when our company first started, no one was doing what we were doing, as is the same with a lot of the businesses that are out there today. And so you're doing a lot of missionary driven selling. And to me, great business is about great storytelling. It's like, how do I create a story that my clients want to be a part of? How do I create a story that my employees want to be a part of, right? And crossing the chasm to me is all about that, because I will tell you, there are many dark days when you're sitting there being like, oh my God, why did I do this? How am I making payroll next month? And everything on the outside always looks great. It's like, CloudBreak's got its sign on the building here, and we've built out a lot of hospitals, but we still to this day have issues that pop up in the business. They're like, all right, how am I going to wrap my head around this? And it's a gut punch, and you got to figure out how you're going to handle that gut punch at any point in time. I think what we've been doing is it's all about, the word culture has come up in different capacities here today, but this to me is about corporate culture. And I think one of the things we've done very successfully in the business, and I will tell you a lot is like we've talked about COVID in terms of how it's changed us over the course of the last year, but I take a look at things also like Black Lives Matter, the last presidency, like all of these things have had a fundamental impact on how we carry ourselves every day, the level of anxiety that we have, and everything else. So for us, what we've done at CloudBreak is really build a very tight culture. Post Black Lives Matter, we were already a very diverse business. So arguably speaking 250 different languages, having amazing immigration stories as part of our employee base, having a really diverse culture where we couldn't have a Christmas lunch. We had a celebration of success because we didn't want to offend anyone in the company. It's really different when that's your business versus saying, I'm going to build diversity in my company. But one of the things that we really view as a strength now is that diversity. And we had a Black Lives Matter town hall that really brought the company together. Tears were shed. People were sharing their stories, and everyone locked arms during that and COVID to really fundamentally change how we operate as a business. And so to me, crossing the chasm is all about not how your company does when things are going great, because it's really easy, right? You look at companies like Google and everybody else, when you have a ton of money to spend, it's easy to throw money at problems and fix them. But what defines you as a company is how you respond on a limited budget when things aren't going well. And so that's always been my message to the team is, look, we're going to stand up. We're going to stand by our principles. We have a problem with a client. We're going to address it head on. We're going to own it. And even in situations where we had to give up revenue to fix a problem, we gave up that revenue, right? And those were symbols to the rest of the business of our commitment to our client base. So to me, it's all about building that corporate culture up front and really working on it and tending to it and being active about it. And all of our recent DEI initiatives, I think, have really made the company a better place to be. And I've never seen the team more galvanized than it is right now.
That's great. Dr. Eckstein, you're the youngest age company in our group today, and yet you've got a proven solution that's working. What are the keys to help you scale your business? And by the way, we've got people online here with connections. Is there anything that everybody online here can do to help any of our businesses, especially yours today, in terms of how you're going to grow and scale Tele 911?
Dave, thanks for that question. I think Jamey's points were really spot on. It's really, I think you're getting your MVP and really going live with your first client is really almost like Sisyphean, if you will, because you're really climbing a difficult mountain. And the metaphor I use is from the time that Elon Musk conceived of having an electric car to actually selling the first Tesla. I mean, I think that's really the challenge. Once you go live, I think you're running downhill, and that's the fun part. And scaling, I think, is relatively easy. Maybe I'm being overly optimistic. But I think, everybody on this call, obviously has an entrepreneurial spirit. Number one, I think you have to be a bit of a visionary and a bit of a risk taker. I think that's the difference, because everyone here, is very bright and highly educated and left probably a fairly lucrative position in the corporate sector to veer out on their own in the wilderness with a lot of risk because they really believed in their vision. And I think having vision in the healthcare space, I think in all of our previous lives, or for me, also my current life, as a clinician, we see the incredible inefficiencies and waste in the U.S. healthcare system. We don't see a lot of positive metrics in terms of how we stack up to the rest of the world, who spends a fraction of what we do per capita in this country. And I think the health disparities, the health inequities that existed were only highlighted by COVID. I can tell you, as an emergency physician, having treated countless COVID patients and seen, sadly, ultimately COVID patients die over the last year, I wasn't surprised in terms of what communities were decimated. People who had poor health to begin with failed what I call the Darwinian challenge. Whether you're hit by a car or you get COVID, if you're obese or have diabetes or hypertension, let alone poorly controlled diabetes or hypertension, you're more likely to get sick, get hospitalized, hospitalized or die. So I think all of us, the similarities here of what I mentioned, for me being in the EMS space, and it's going back many moons ago, I was a paramedic in New York City in the 1980s, and the system hasn't fundamentally changed in all those years. You know, you call, we haul, and all roads go to the ER. And what's also kind of interesting is the technology that's available to call for an Uber car or to request a Domino's pizza to be delivered to your home. That technology doesn't exist in the 911 system. We don't know where you're calling. We still have to have the caller spell out, most calls now, of course, are on cell phone, not landline. Landline now, those are in the museum. So most calls are from callers calling a cell phone. Our call takers have to elicit the location and they have to triangulate by cell tower, which could be a mile away. Spell out the street name if they can't tell a B from a D. And if it's Main Street in LA, is that Main Street downtown or is that Main Street in San Pedro? It's 30 miles apart, let alone their apartment number. And then of course the person calling can't see the ambulance coming like you can with an Uber car. So the fact that technology to order a pizza pie is at least 10 years ahead of getting an ambulance when your loved one is dying, I think is sobering. And part of what we bring to bear is, I think what we offer is ability to free up the paramedics to get off scene for all we call the background noise. Meaning people have a need, they call 911. We've been victims of our own success. Every police car, every fire engine, every billboard, call 911 for all your emergencies, and people realize, hey, if I have any problem, whether my cat's caught in a tree, or I didn't take my blood pressure pills, or I had the sniffles, I'll call 911, and irrespective of my ability to pay, I'll get someone here to help me in uniform in probably under 8 minutes. And then if that person is hearing voices or they ran out of their meds, paramedics have only two options: take that person to the ER by ambulance, or say, sorry, figure it out on your own. So we try to bridge that gap, leverage technology and innovation, bring the virtual provider, meaning doctors, to the patients. The metrics are paramedics would be released to get back into the system about an hour faster by not having the transport. And of course, what we saw with the huge COVID surge in LA back in January, the time it takes for paramedics to transfer care in ED, which we call wall time, because the paramedics are on the wall because there's no beds in the ED, that was off the charts. We had wall times of 8 hours routinely. The longest was 16 hours. We got to critical mass in middle of January during the surge where we had about 5% of our ambulances available in the entire city. I've never seen that in my career. So, whether it's a pandemic or an earthquake or man-made from terrorism or a tsunami or whatever the case may be, I think that COVID will serve to, forever change the healthcare system. I think all of us want to see that change for the better, make it more patient-centered, leverage technology and innovation, cut costs, because clearly the fact that we're spending 1/7 of our GDP on healthcare, that we had so many people, I think, die potentially preventable deaths from COVID because they didn't know they had diabetes or hypertension or couldn't get adequate primary care. That's a real tragedy. And I think all of us have an opportunity to really change that for the better.
Well, great. Thank you. And we're going to bring our session to a close. We're at the top of the hour here. I'd like to echo kind of Jamey's, one of Jamey's earliest comments as we started our session today, that for all the entrepreneurs, that it really is about making things accessible and easy for people to do something new so that they will do it repeatedly. We often talk at SnapMD when we were developing our platform that we should not use competing telemedicine platforms as our comparables. We should use Amazon and, as Dr. Eckstein said, Domino's, and whatever apps that the patient uses 5 to 10 times a day. That was the design experience we had to have so that these patients will accept and use digital technology faster. We introduced a patient presenter capability, and we felt so good about our design that while we had an introductory video for the doctors to learn how to use it, 99% skipped the video and went right to the use of it. And that told us that we had accomplished something fairly unique in the healthcare space. So I would really like to thank Dr. Eckstein, Dr. Flatley, Dr. Caimano, and Jamey for joining us today. Ahmed, thank you for letting me pull this esteemed group together. We hope that everyone walks away with a kernel or two that may help you in your endeavors. And please, if any of you have connections that can help our fellow entrepreneurs here take their businesses the next step, you've got access through the portal for this event to reach out. And I know any of our panelists today would love introductions that would help them grow their businesses and make it easier and faster.
Absolutely. Take advantage of the ability to communicate on HOVA. And I want to thank you all, and virtual or physical clap for our terrific panel, and really been inspirational, educational, and I like your passion, and I'm an advocate of digital health, and I like to see people around you around us advocating for digital health like you. And in the future, for sure, we're going to have more events, and you will be invited to speak about your activities, and wish you the best of luck in what you're doing. Thank you very much. And